how do we identify a crossover and the bar at which, the moving average crossover occurs, that becomes basically a setup bar, right? And then wait for either the current candle or some candle shortly afterwards, to break out or surpass the setup bar's higher low. So this is slightly different. This is a little simpler to do because you're just waiting for, after the crossover, you're just waiting for the current bar, to close higher, than the previous bar's high. If it's a crossover long, you're waiting for the current bar, or you're checking to see if the current bar, closes higher than the candle that on which the crossover occurred. Similar question, right, that was previously asked. The reason why we're going to revisit this question here with a setup bar is to do another video on the new indicator that we released several months ago, right? So we have a setup bar indicator now to help create these systems a lot easier than the way that was used prior, right? So if you watch this older video, you'll see that there's a bunch of groups of logic nodes, right? There's a bunch of group of logic nodes that are required to do, so this part here. So when a long setup bar occurs, any of the next 5 bars, that print one tick higher than the high of the setup bar produces a long signal. So basically finding this condition here took a lot of extra nodes and logic. So with the new setup bar indicator, we've simplified the whole building process, right? We've reduced the number of nodes and simplified the logic. So we have a 9 EMA and a 30 EMA. Let's see, I'll make this stricter here. So we have our crossover bar here, right? So the moving averages, right, they cross over in between the 2 bars. So here's the crossover bar or the setup bar. And then what we want is for the close of the next bar to close higher than the high of the previous bar, like so, right? And so it did right there. And so we would get a long signal right there. And over here, so we actually have a cross down bar, and we'd want, right, and we'd want, now let's say the next 3 bars. The next 3 bars would need to close lower, right, than the setup bar. And vice versa, right? The next 3 bars would need to close higher than the setup bar if it's a long cross up. So, right, so over here, basically, right, we have a failure here. So none of the next 3 bars closed lower than the low of the setup bar, right? So no signal there, but we would get a long signal here. So good simple example right there. All right, so let's get BloodHound open. So let's go over to the logic tab. We need to create a new logic template here. So we need to hit the new button. And let's see here. All right, here we go. So we have an EMA 9, crossing over the 30 with a setup bar breakout. Before we actually get started, right, we're going to save that, close that out, right? So before we get started, we actually need to set up another indicator here. So, right, going into the Shark Indicators folder and then going into Tools, right, we're going to be using the BloodHound Setup Bar Prices indicator. Right. And so this indicator, the setup bar prices indicator, right, is what's going to track the high of our setup bar, and or it's going to track the low, right, of the setup bar, right? And that's how we can identify, right, by having an indicator that plots the high of a long setup bar, plotting the high price forward in time, or plotting the low price forward in time. That's how we're going to be able to identify whether the close of the next three bars, breaks below or breaks above, the high or the low, right? So the first thing we do need to do is set up this indicator here first. In order to use the setup bar prices indicator, right, you first need a BloodHound template file, right? So that's the first thing we're going to have to do, is build a simple template file and load it in here. And that's how we're going to be able to get the setup bar prices indicator to work, right? So if I put this on the chart with no template file loaded, right, we're going to get this little message here, right, telling you that, you have to load a BloodHound template file, that identifies the conditions for the setup bar, right? And so our setup bar is just a simple, 930 crossover. So let's do that first. Let's see here. So what I'll do is let's pull up my extra chart over here. Let's clean this up a little bit. And let's see. I do have an SMA 1030. Well, yeah, pull those off over there. But yeah, so on the secondary chart, I'll create that simple 930 crossover BloodHound template here. So, all right, so for the name here, we'll call this EMA 9 crossover 30. Yeah, I'll put a little space in there. There. All right. So here's a separate. So what we're doing is we're building a totally separate BloodHound template file that we're going to then load into our setup bar prices indicator. So let's grab a crossover solver, add that to the chart. All right, there we go. So I named my solver, and sorry, getting a little ahead of myself. So let me switch over to the logic tab here, and we'll create a new logic template here. So, all right, I'll just call this the 9 crossover 30, just to keep it simple. And then let me go to my existing nodes, right? Because I already started to build that crossover solver. So I will just drop that existing node that I already started on the board. There we go, connect it up. Okay, so now let me finish setting up the inputs here, right? So we want an EMA 9 crossing an EMA 30. So let's replace the SMA with the EMA. All right, so input A is going to be the EMA 9. All right, so input A, you typically want to be the faster moving average, and input B, that will be the slower moving average. All right, there's the EMA, and let's put in the 30 period. All right, so there we have it. Pretty simple and straightforward. So, all right, let's close that out, and here we go. So I don't have the EMAs on my chart, but there we go. We can see a couple of crossover signals there. There we go. So there's a bunch more. All right, so we have our crossover template made. over here. There. So let's minimize that chart. We can close that away. And so let's go back right to our main chart and go into the indicators list, and we can finish setting up the setup bar prices indicator here. Right, so now that we actually have a separate, remember this has to be a separate BloodHound template file that you load into the setup bar prices. Right, so that is critical. And so there is our separate template file. And you must have a logic template defined, right? So that simple crossover, right, only had one solver, so it's easy to think that maybe, well, because it's only one solver, that we didn't need to use a logic template, but this indicator does require using a logic template. So, all right, so there's our 9 crossover 30 logic template. So we have that loaded into place. So far, so good. If you want, you can enable racing stripes, but keep in mind that only one indicator can put racing stripes on the entire chart. So just keep that in mind, that the setup bar prices indicator will be competing with BloodHound for who has control over the racing stripes on the chart, right? And there's no way that NinjaTrader allows you to decide which indicator has priority. So NinjaTrader picks at random one of the indicators. So there's no way to define which one has priority over the other. So I'm just going to leave the racing stripes off here, but instead I will show a chart marker. We'll put a chart marker on there, and let's use triangles. So that way it's less confusing than the arrows there. So we'll put a little triangle marker on there. And call it good. All right, so here, let's get rid of my dots now. Right, so there we can, right, there's our little down triangle for the cross down, identifying the setup bar. Right, and more importantly, we can see the high of the setup bar and the low of the setup bar being plotted. Right, so, and of course, it's going to be plotted. Right, these prices will be plotted until the next crossover occurs, and then the plots will adjust to the next setup bar. Right, they'll adjust to the next setup bar, and then that next setup bar's high and low prices will then be plotted. Right? So, okay, so there we go. So there's that. So now we can get back to our main BloodHound system here, right? So let's go back, go back to the Logic tab. And so what we're looking for, back to, the main system here, what we're looking for is the close of one of the next 3 bars to close higher, right, than the setup bar. Yeah, so what we're going to need, we're going to need this 3-bar counter. Yeah, we're going to need a 3-bar counter here. So we're going to have to recreate a crossover solver here. So I'll grab a crossover solver. I'll plug that in. All right, so we're going to recreate this crossover once again. Let's see, all right, so the EMA 9 period. So that's input A, the EMA 9, and input B is going to be the EMA 30. Like so. All right, and now we're going to use the look back period here. So if I set this to 3, right, now we can see once we get a crossover, we get 3 signals total for the crossover. So we get the crossover signal plus 2 additional signals afterwards. So actually I wanted 3 bars afterwards. So my look back actually needs to be set to 4. Let's increase that by 1. There we go. So I have the setup bar plus 3 bars afterwards, right? So I have the crossover plus 3 bars afterwards, right? So this establishes our 3 bar limit, right? So we're giving, the market 3 bars after the crossover. We're giving it that 3 bar limit as a chance to break out, right? Or break below or break above. So, all right. So that establishes, how many bars after the crossover, that we're limiting this system to. So there's that. And so now we can now do the comparison, right? So now we would compare, so for example here, right, we'd compare the close of the bar, right, to the low, and remember, so we're going to compare the close of the bar to the setup bar prices indicator, right? So we'll be comparing all these closing prices to the plot of the setup bar price indicator, right? So we're comparing those two, data points to each other, or those two prices to each other. So we're going to grab a comparison solver to do that comparison. Okay, let's connect that in there. So let's see here. So we're going to compare the closing price to, let's see here, what should I call this? I guess I'll call it the, call it to, what is it? Okay, high, low of the 930 crossover. There we go. So, all right, some kind of name like that. All right, so input A, right? That's going to be the closing price of the bar. So input A, we want the prices, right? We want the bar prices, right? And the closing price is what we want. And then input B, right? Well, that's going to be the high or low price of our 930 crossover, which we're getting those high and low prices from the setup bar prices indicator, right, on our chart. So for input B, right, we're going to go into the Shark Indicators folder and then go into the tools and select our setup bar prices indicator. There we go. And so now we need to load in the BloodHound template, right? And that's our other BloodHound template file here, the EMA 930 crossover, right? So remember, never load in the same template file into itself, right? So the system that we're building is using this template file. So we would never want to load this template file into the setup bar prices indicator, because we would create a circular reference, an infinite loop, right? And that will just instantly crash NinjaTrader, right? Creating an infinite loop will crash every single program out there. So that's why you have to create a totally separate file here so that we don't create this infinite circular loop. So, all right, so load that in. And then the next thing is the selected logic template. So, and that's just our 930 crossover. And that's all we need to do, you know, when we're using the indicator inside of BloodHound. That's all we need to do there. Let's see. So now we need to figure out what prices are we comparing to, right? So when we're comparing the close, you know, what are we comparing the close of the bar to what prices here, right? So for a long signal, right, we'd be comparing the close to the high of the setup bar. So for a long, we'd be comparing to the high price, right? The high price. And so it's going to be the reverse for a short cross down signal. So for a short signal, we'd be comparing to the low price. Let's see. Well, yeah, we can't see it on the chart there, but right. But over here, if it's a cross down, we'd be comparing the close of the bar to the low price of the setup bar. So, get that out of the way. Okay, so there is our comparison solver, you know, that's able to compare the closing price to the higher or low of our setup bar, basically, right? I guess I could call this, yeah, the setup bar, all right, the higher or low of the setup bar. And so now we just need a AND node, and we can connect these up, right? So remember, this is our crossover condition here, right? And then connect that in, and there we have it. So, and there's our signal, right? And over here, there was no signal. So let's see if we have any more signals here. All right, there we go. So there's a few more signals. Let's take a look at these. Let's see. All right, so here's our triangle. So we have a cross down. So there's our setup bar. And so we did get a close lower than the setup bar. Let's see, when is this? Yeah, this is early in the morning. So yeah, so we're just ending up with a bunch of chop early in the morning. But, and then next, we have a long cross up. So there's our green triangle. So here's the next setup bar right here. And then 1, 2, 3 bars later, so on the third bar, we did get a close higher than the high of the setup bar. So if we want to draw those, there we go. There's that one. And let's see, on this short signal, there we go. So that close is lower than the low of the setup bar there. All right. So if you go back, right, so if you actually go back and watch this video, or, you know, maybe better yet, you could just download the BloodHound template file and take a look, you know, at the logic of this older template file, you know, and compare that to this. You know, this is so much simpler, right? This only took 2 nodes, whereas you know, this template file probably took about 10 or 12 nodes. Depends on how many bars. Let's see. So next 5 bars. Yeah, so maybe it took about 15 nodes or so. So, yeah. All right. So I think that does it for this question here.